Today we're on week 2 of the flow, and we're talking about how to honor yourself as a channel of genius. This morning I was talking to my husband about these concepts, and I was thinking about this guy, Sam Christensen. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of his work, but he was like this mystic teacher in Los Angeles, and he helped artists and actors to find their true essence. And so you go to him and he'd do all these kinds of exercises. And he actually, when I got to him, we weren't even allowed to study with him. He was like the master guru, and we had to study with his other little people. But we got to meet with him during the last 2 weeks of our, working with him, with his practice, Sam Christensen. And he would go around the room and say, like, this is your essence, this is what you're here for. And he came to me and he said, you're here to wake people up from nightmares. And I was like, what? That's not what I want. Like, that sounds terrible. And I had to pretend like I wasn't like really let down by that. I was like, that's interesting, and try and hold that. And it wasn't until I started moving into, that was a long time before I even started practicing A Course in Miracles, that I realized that prophecy, that idea was actually something I did want to do. So today when we talk about your genius, many times we think our genius is one thing and it's totally different. And I want you to be open to the possibility of that. So, Marianne Williamson gives us this poem. We ask ourselves, who are we to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, and fabulous? But actually, who are we not to be? As we identify and move past our blocks, we get to experience a breadth of choice that we sometimes didn't even know was available to us. A more extravagant, a more opulent, a more expansive choice. In Eric Butterworth's book, The Flow of Life, he makes a really interesting point. He quotes Jesus and he says, "Blessed are the pure in spirit, for they will see God." And he goes on to say that the word I comes from a Sanskrit word, which means fountain. And that it's common definition of I in the Bible, meaning to flow like a fountain. And that the I is not so much taking in as we think it's taking in, as it's giving out, projecting like a projector out into the world, casting shade or casting meaning, or optimally flowing like a fountain. As a fountain flows and nurtures and nourishes the land around it, this is the same with our own sight. The way that we decide to consciously see the world will determine not just our state of mind, but our state of being. So this is how we actually get to see. We channel light, and this is a way that we also channel our genius, because we're not cultivating it. It's not coming from us. It's not something we're pushing or projecting out into the world. The brilliance that flows from us comes from this same source. And when we become conscious of this law, we can transform our lives from a mundane, madhouse to something that's more along the lines of mysticism. Sometimes we might think like mysticism, like that's not what I'm about, but you actually wouldn't be in the circle if you weren't about that. So I hate to break the news to you. And of course, Miracles says we're all teachers. And what are we teaching? We're teaching love. And what is love? It's the indefinable. So we're literally moving into the mystic. So of course, Kathy sang that song. Of course, that's just the synchronicities of it all. So what we focus on increases when we use our fountain, our vision, our genius to pour it out into the world. It expands. What we focus on not only grows, but it also flows. In this book, The Flow of Life by Eric Butterworth, he says that God is the sphere whose center is everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere. I think that's a really incredible definition of this concept of God. Its center is everywhere, its circumference is nowhere, meaning I sit in the center of God and you sit in the center of God. And that our consciousness is the ruler of what our experiences ends up being in our universe. This is why Einstein says it's a really important question to ask yourself. Maybe one of the most important questions to ask yourself is, do we believe that we live in a friendly or a hostile world? Because this is the thought that will pour out through us. If we believe we live in a friendly world, we will shed light on that world. If we believe we live in a hostile world, we will project that world. So you can answer this question on what type of world you live in by scanning the cast of your own personal movie. Is your life and landscape filled with villains and victims? Or is it filled with swagger and vixens? Because here's the thing. This is, first of all, seeing somebody, anyone, as a villain, it is not a wise thing. It means that you've taken somebody that you don't like, that you don't care for, and you think is maybe dangerous, and you've given them a lot of power. And then you rent out a part of your mind and a part of your heart, and you let them take up residence without even paying any rent. And you continue to foster this idea of this dangerous villain in your life, and they end up living up to how you have cast them, because that's the story that you're watering for them. So that's what we do with villains, but we actually do that with victims too. I think it's even more detrimental when we do it with victims. And that's when we take somebody that we love or we care about or we cherish or we're concerned about, and we see them as helpless and trampled on, and we continue to subject them to this wounding because we think of them in this way, and we make the most important thing about them their worst hour. And because of that, that's the story that we continue to water. And so if you have a friend who's experiencing any degree of victimhood, the optimal idea is to hold the high watch for them and say, like, you are so much better and bigger than this. If not, you continue to believe that this person is being victimized and you're watering the wrong story, and you continue to define themselves by something that that's not even the truth. That's when we're dealing with other people. But for today, we're not going to deal with other people. We're going to deal with just ourselves. How we see it, other people will be on the back table. Let's just do our own work, knowing that everyone is doing their own work. And if you're doing your work and someone in your sphere is not doing their work, there's only one thing that can happen, is you will part ways. Through some endeavor, you will part ways, because they will not align with your consciousness. So that's the good news. I don't need to keep your report card. That's the good news. And in fact, if I did keep your report card, I would actually be doing a disservice to my consciousness. I don't have to villainize you or victimize you. Your consciousness will bring you the classrooms. Like you can see that with actually people in your life who you think are quote unquote terrible or making bad choices. Like eventually they do self-implode. And I don't mean that as a bad thing, but it's just something to notice. Like, don't waste your energy on that. Like everything takes care of itself in the end. So if I'm wise, I'll simply turn the channel from needing to distract myself with, what's not my business, and turn into what I'm actually available for. What am I really here and hot and holy and ready to water? What do I want to water? What do you want to water? I want to take a moment with you and invite you to just close your eyes and think about that. What am I here to water? I love doing this around this time of year because it's like the perfect cusp of spring, where we're thinking about the seeds and intentions that we might want to press to the soil of our consciousness. So for a moment with me, imagine that you are actually in incredible harmony with every relationship in your life. That your home is beautiful and on point and safe and sunny and sacred and a sanctuary. That your finances provide you with the ability to never have to think about whether or not this need or want or desire is in the budget. That your finances feel flush and flowing and fluid. And that your mode of operation, your car or however you get around, is so optimal. Like you feel so well cared for in regards to your mobility, and in regards to your health and your habits, all your health and habits. Imagine yourself living this really vibrant, vital, optimal lifestyle. And then your experiences with loved ones and friendships and romance, that all of these places in your life, just imagine them being so flush and so vibrant and so vital and healthy, that all of your creations and your collaborations and everything that you contribute to life, imagine all of those things that you give out into the world are so appreciated. That there's so much praise returned to you, that there's so much enthusiasm for your generosity of spirit and for your ability to access your creative nature. Just let yourself feel into that for a little while. Take a moment to entertain the pictures that are flooding your mind. Feel into it. Imagine the way you feel in this experience. And when you're ready, bring yourself back into our gathering. Turn your fountains back towards the community. So A Course in Miracles says that it's impossible that anything should come unbidden to me. How do things come bidden into our lives? They come bidden into our lives through our thoughts and our emotions, both conscious and unconscious. And so when I invited you into that awareness of this other, maybe exaggerated, maybe alternative life that I just walked you through, you might have noted that some of these suggestions felt like, ah, yes, like I'm a yes to that. You might have also noticed that some of those suggestions felt like, what? Like, that's not true. Like, that's not, I'm uncomfortable with you saying that because that's not true. And when we get to feel uncomfortable, we're outside of our comfort zone. And when we're outside of our comfort zone, the first thing we feel is raw and vulnerable and sometimes even angry. So just notice that. The loss of old beliefs can make us feel unsettled and shaky and vulnerable. So you see, the life that you're living right now on the sphere of form is your comfort zone. That's actually what you're comfortable in. And when you stretch past the comfort zone, it's no longer comfortable and people get uncomfortable. And there's a lot invested in staying in the comfort zone. But to live in the zone of genius is where we access this experience of flow. And we're not here to live in comfort. We're here to live in our genius, which is beyond comfort. So I was once at this business convention for entrepreneurs, and the presenter was telling us that the most important thing that you can give to your business is to have the right people in the right role. Like when somebody is in their genius and just absolutely singing in their role, like businesses can, just flourish from having the right people in the right role. Conversely, having the wrong people in the wrong role, you could just take a business right down. So finding your own footing and where your genius is going to make the whole difference in your life. Many years ago, my husband gave me this packet of cocktail napkins, and that read, she had not yet decided to use her power for good or evil. And it always got a good laugh. But something came up recently that made me think about those napkins. And I realized that this is the moment, this is the talk, this is the series, this prosperity series, where we're actually embarking on finding that answer. Would I use my power for good or for evil? And I'm not saying, would I be a good person? Because I am a good person and you are a good person. That's not the question. We're good people. But will we use our power for good? And in order to answer that question, we got to get really clear on where our power lives. Your genius and your power are synonymous. In order for me to find my power, I'll have to know what it feels like to live in my genius zone instead of my competence zone or my expertise zone. So again, I'm talking about Gay Hendricks, these 4 zones of functionality, and you can find more about them in The Big Leap. But the zones are incompetence and competence, excellence, and then genius. And maybe most of us hang out a lot of times in competence and maybe excellence. But for the next 8 weeks, we're going to try and really push past those comfort zones and begin to move into our zone of genius during this prosperity series. So let me just break it down for you a little bit. The zone of incompetence and competence is just what they sound like. One area is where you are ill-fitted, your skills do not match up, and the other is where you can fit in, but you don't fail, but you also don't fly. It's like you're flying almost under the radar, where you're just competent. You're like, you can do this. You can tie your shoe. You're competent at that. It's not necessarily your genius. So that's incompetence and competence. The zone of excellence is the zone that where you're doing something that you are highly skilled at. It's often a zone that's cultivated through practice or established over time. It's something that you learned or you taught yourself or you invested in. For me, an example of that would be being a writer. When I first started writing, I was dyslexic, I was not confident, it didn't come easy. And I have some innate talent in writing, but mostly I've had to really work at it to become a good writer. So that would be my zone of excellence. Your zone of genius, on the other hand, is the thing that you do without even thinking about doing it. It's the thing that just happens around you and it comes so naturally to you that you don't even realize that it's your genius. For me, that might be something more along the lines of like causing community. You know, when it comes to building and being around community, that's just my breath, my body, my brain is naturally just going to offer itself without my permission to be used to support community. It's just a thing that happens. And now here's the thing, after many decades of devoting myself to spiritual practices and creativity, the communities that unfold from my genius are usually based in creativity and spirituality. But back in the day, before I even knew that this was my genius, I was creating communities, but I just wasn't conscious. So my communities just looked like a lot of drunks hanging out in a room in a big party. Like that was my community. I was using the same exact skills. So it's not enough just to know your genius, but also it's important to know that you want to use this power for good. In the zone of genius, you capitalize on your natural abilities, which are innate rather than learned. This is a state in which you get to the flow, finding ceaseless and seamless inspiration and synchronicities and effortlessness and rewards and rewarding engagements. So the question that you want to ask is not, what do I want to do or be, but rather, what seems to be happening organically and naturally around me? What naturally flows up around you? What happens effortlessly and in joy? It's not a job. It flows from you like the scent flows from the flower. That would be a really extremely blissful place to live. You don't need to do anything. There's this quote that I love from Franz Kafka, and he says, "You don't need to do anything. Remain seated at your table and listen. You don't even need to listen, just wait. You don't even need to wait, just learn to be quiet, still, solitary, and the world will freely offer itself to you unmasked. It has no choice. It will roll in ecstasy at your feet." Now, what I think he's trying to say here is if you stay in your most effortless state and genius, your genius will emerge and it will allow that state of your being to be enough. See, so many times we're in our state of genius and we don't think it's enough. So when I didn't realize that just causing community was an effortless thing, a joyful thing, and I could do that, I also put more on that. I was like, I better make coffee for people. I better make dessert. Oh, I'm not kidding you. When I started teaching A Course in Miracles and I invited women over to my house, I put out a banquet every time. I don't know what the frick I was thinking, but like I just added a parade to every party. But I didn't have to do that. I could take some notes from, Franz and just let it be. Let my brilliance and my genius be enough. What you think is everyday and normal is sometimes the most extraordinary thing about you that you do so effortlessly that you might not even value it. I think that's a really interesting blind spot to investigate. So I got invited a couple of years back to do a couple talks at the Bodhi Spiritual Center in Chicago, actually. And I want to just explain to you what this zone of brilliance might look like and how it can benefit you. So the talks were supposed to be on Eric Butterworth, who I've used today already, on his book called Spiritual Economics. And the funny thing was that I was thinking like numbers, me, like, I'm not really great at numbers. Though I didn't study the book, I had an idea of what he was teaching, which was consciousness, which was what we were talking about last week. And then I had way more to do with consciousness than form anyhow. And that if we dealt with the consciousness, and I have known this for a long time, that if we deal with the consciousness, that we need to very little. So consciousness requires that we simply be still and to know God and to access that knowing and to move into our oneness with all. I know I might make it sound easy, but you've had this experience already. So the thing that you might pop up in your mind when you think that you're making it sound easy is the fact that we are addicted, and I still am addicted to multitasking and the crazy busyness and the doing of the world. And we get tricked into all these ways of the world that tell us to basically like run like crazy with your hair on fire and do everything and be everywhere and do it all with the feeling of knowing that you will never measure up. You will never be enough. So I don't know if you guys have fallen asleep at all underneath that spell, but that's the spell that we want to break. It's a universal epidemic, so you're not alone. The idea is that there's no need to hustle, that we are not here to hustle, I'm not here to hustle. So I go to do these talks, and I decided, well, I'm just going to work with the consciousness, just like we did last week when we talked about the lilies of the valley and the birds that are singing, and they understand the reciprocal nature with the oneness, and they've decided that they live in a fair and friendly world. And so we're going to tap into that consciousness. Because we are here to channel. And I had been teaching A Course in Miracles for a while, and I knew that Course told me, that we are here to create the good, the beautiful, and the holy. Do not forget this. And so I knew that that was my part, to create the good, the beautiful, and the holy. When I went to do these talks, the woman who hired me said that they were going to pay me $250 and a talk. And I thought, okay, I'm not sure. That doesn't feel right to me. It didn't feel like it was a fair exchange. So I decided I was going to do the whole talk based on spider energy, which I love talking about. And at the time I was hired to give the talks, and she was saying they're $250. I wanted to do the talks, but I wanted to also work the principles while doing the talks. So I sat down with myself and I said to myself, Self, what would you like to get paid for these talks? And the number immediately came to me, that I would like to get paid $2,000 for these talks. Now, I had been paid $2,000 for doing talks before, so it wasn't a major stretch, but I didn't understand how that was going to help me at all, because I wasn't going to go back to the church and say, I deserve dollars, or this is what I'll do it for. I knew I wasn't going to do that. So I had this idea of what I thought would be fair, and then I just turned it over to the Holy Spirit. The spider is this very mystical character that has so much to teach us. She knows her worth. She moves through her day with no baggage, no wants, no needs, no stress, no hustle. She just decides, I want to live there. She crawls her way up to wherever she wants to live. She starts doing casting her brilliance, her consciousness, and she starts creating. And I think that's a really powerful teacher. Have you ever met anyone who's just totally in their power with no baggage? I mean, she has no doubts about who she is or what her purpose is. She's an artist. She's a weaver of webs. She's creating something good and beautiful and holy. She doesn't judge her web against anyone else's webs. She doesn't go to the web store and try and purchase a better way of making a web campaign. She doesn't do an all-day workshop on the top 10 ways to catch flies. Like, she just decides, this is who I am. This is my genius. She goes to the source. The spider goes to the all and the everything, the great mystery of God, and she pulls from herself and weaves her web, her passion, her purpose, and her possibility. And this is what she's born to do. It comes naturally to her. It's her genius. No trouble, no toil. She's lost in her art. And when she's done, she doesn't put up signs. She doesn't send out invitations. She doesn't say, hey, you guys, check out my, she doesn't do any of that. She just sits in her brilliance. She doesn't even drop to her knees and pray. She knows that she's done her part. She simply sits by and lets the world return itself back to her, because she's done her part. I think that's an amazing teacher. I think it's even more impactful if we actually practice it. God does not love you any less than the spider. To truly know this requires complete faith. And yes, that can be a bit scary. And I think that's why we connect spiders with fear, because she's showing us the effortless way, and her effortless way symbolize for us where we've fallen asleep. So this is what I know for sure. If you knew your genius, if you really knew your genius, you would know your divine purpose. And if you knew your divine purpose, you would know exactly where to go and what to do and what to say. And if you knew the exact right next steps to take in your life, that you would feel like you were on course and in the flow, and you've probably had this experience already. And if you're on course and in the flow, you would be working with the energy of love, not against it. And you would never have to work another day in your life or figure out where your next check was coming from. But this is a philosophy, a theology that you get to test out. It only comes from your belief in a friendly and reciprocal nature of the law and love of God. So it's something to play around with, to kind of banish from your belief system this God that desires us to toil and trouble over situations. God is invested in your passion and your purpose. And if more folks were living from their passion and their purpose, it would just be a nicer world. So I'd been working with the spider story for a little while, and I show up at the church and I get this clear idea of what I'm going to be teaching. And the woman who hires me, she says, hey, you know, here's the thing. We don't have a workshop after your series. So we're going to let you do a workshop after your series, but we're not going to promote it. So any money that you get from your workshop, you get to keep it all. And do you want to do that? And I thought, yeah, sure, I'll do that. So I go and I do the talks and I talk about the spider energy, and I do the second talk, and I find myself saying from the stage, and I before the event, I sold tickets online to the workshop for like $25, $30. And I found myself saying on stage, if you don't have the money for the workshop, don't worry, you can come to it. Like, I don't want anyone to be excluded from this. So after the 2 talks, I walk into the class and I get people coming up to me saying, I don't have any money. You said I could come. I said, yep, that's right. Come on in. I don't have any money. You said I could come. I'm like, okay, come on in. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm not going to make any money off of this. I'm going to work my ass off and everybody's going to jump on for free. But I also knew, like, that's not the thought that I wanted to step into the workshop with. So I knew to shake that from my consciousness. And when I got to the door, there was a woman standing there. And she said, I really enjoyed your talk and I can't stay because I have other plans, but I want to buy a ticket for everyone who comes to the workshop. And I said, you want to buy a ticket for everyone who comes to the workshop that doesn't have a ticket and can't afford it? And she said, no, I want to buy a ticket for everyone who comes to the workshop. And I said, but some people have already paid for tickets. And she said, I don't care, count the heads. And I was like, what? And I walked into the workshop and there were people there. And I said, everybody's ticket is paid today by this woman. And they said, where is she? And I turned around and she was gone. I'm like, was that a figment of my imagination? And I was thinking, like, what just happened? She came back and she wrote me a check for $800. And I put it in my pocket and I did the workshop. And so I had the $500 from doing the talks. I had the $800 from her. I had the ticket money that I sold online. And before the workshop was over, another woman came up to me and handed me a $500 tithing check. So I left there with just a little over $2,000. And that is just from spider consciousness. That is just from knowing your worth, showing up, doing a good job, and letting the rest of it come to you. And now, I'm not always an expert at this, and if you know me, you know that's true. But every once in a while, I work the principles in my affairs, and they never fail me. So as we're moving into this series on prosperity, we're going deep and we're going to apply these amazing principles of the 7 keys of prosperity. We're going to be starting next Sunday after Sunday. We're going to be starting the Monday after, and we're going for 7 weeks with myself and Beth Gordon. And we're going to be supporting each other in actively applying the tools and the technologies and the spiritual principles of prosperity and of living in your genius. Because when it comes right down to it, I really do believe that Franz is correct. You don't need to do anything. You're already more than enough. Remain seated at your table and just listen. You don't even need to listen. You can just wait. You don't even need to wait. You can just sit in solitude and the world will freely offer itself to you unmasked. It has no choice. It will roll in ecstasy at your feet. Do not fear your own genius. Excellence hits a target that no one else can hit. Genius hits a target that no one else can see. And that's the word.